Right. Is that looking good?
Yeah, looks good to me.
Okay, lovely. Okay.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's James Ochiltree. I am the project manager for Low Carbon Hub and the contract manager for Energy Solutions Oxfordshire. And we're here today to talk to you a little bit about what the hub is, what we do, and but more pointedly, how we have worked with a number of community buildings and community halls in the past, and what potential avenues we have to help you all in your community buildings to start to engage with climate change in your communities beyond the amazing work I'm sure you're all already doing. So next slide, please, and we can move on from there.
Oh, hang on. Oh, that's not very... Well, that's bigger anyway. Sorry, I've got to adjust my thing now.
That's all right.
Oh,
Oh,
now we're really sailing.
yeah, absolutely.
Just can't get... Oh, there we are. Go down. Right, apologies.
Fab. Okay, so yeah, so a little bit about the hub. So the Low Carbon Hub is a non-for-profit social enterprise community energy company. We're namely a community benefit society in the IPS and a community interest company in the KIC. So the organisation is divided, but I'll come onto that a little bit in a minute. But essentially, it's our mission to prove that in Oxfordshire, but locally and globally, we can meet our energy needs in a way that's not just good for the planet, so getting panels on roofs and getting things moving forward, but it's good for people as well. A wholly sustainable community energy system, and that can be part of our existing energy system now. So that's our main aim and our main goal is to help engage with that as best we can. Next slide, please. So we try to achieve this goal in a number of ways. Powering up. This is probably one of the more obvious artifacts of what the Low Carbon Hub have done. So the Low Carbon Hub IPS or CBS has helped and installed nearly 40 renewable energy projects across the county. And these are primarily solar PV on schools and businesses. One hydroelectric plant at Sanford, for those more local to Oxford, you may have walked past there on the Thames, and starting to engage now with larger ground mount solar as well. So doing lots of work in helping develop community-owned renewable energy, as the Low Carbon Hub is a community-owned entity primarily. We also look to proliferate community energy, however, and I'll come on to that in a second, because I think that's really the main thrust of what I'm talking to you about here today. We also work on powering down, so it's not just about getting as much renewable energy into the system as we can that's community owned and is working hard in its communities, but in ensuring that we're using that energy as effectively as possible. So we have a number of projects and we also work with a number of communities through our community interest company to help them engage with energy audits to understand what their powering down options can be and to get them working with that. And I'll come to that in a minute as well. So Alison. And lastly, innovation. So community energy has been earmarked for many years as an area that can catalyze innovations within the national energy system, and we wholly believe in that. And so, looking at how we can help develop a smarter, more flexible, and I think the most important point there is a more equitable energy system that doesn't leave anyone behind, that allows anyone to engage in all of the facets of our energy system, whether it be trading your capacity or just being able to get a fairer price on your energy. All of that needs to come forward, and we're working very hard through Project Leo, which is primarily looking at grid side innovation, but also through trialing different business models in terms of cozy homes and Energy Solutions Oxfordshire as well. So we're working hard, but I think one of the main things I want to talk to you about today is namely about that proliferating community energy. It's not just having hub-owned community-owned energy, but helping community energy foster throughout the county. So next slide, please. So absolutely, I think this encapsulates it. So this is Cecilia from Kirkington, and yeah, community energy means absolutely this: it's creating renewable energy projects that are in their local communities of geography or interest, and it's a central part of the transition is having local community energy working hard in that, and it doesn't necessarily need to be hub owned. It needs to be, owned in those communities of interest and geography that can help to move those projects forward. So next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a bit more about kind of what we've done previously. I've glossed over this a bit because it is hopefully important. It shows our track record that we've worked on a very large number of projects across the county, and again, namely solar PV. But I think again, hopefully move on to some of the examples that we've been able to help community halls in. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So yes, most importantly, so probably our most prevalent example of working with community buildings and local communities across the county is in Cullington Village Hall. And so the way we work with them is that initially they came to us for some help desk time. So as I mentioned, the community interest company is the side of the business that holds the staff, but also is the primary process by which we help to disseminate the community benefit that those solar projects produce. So as well as getting panels on roofs, they then generate revenue. That revenue is then repaid to those members of the community that have invested in the project, but also a chunk of that goes into our community benefit pot, which we then look to help to proliferate community energy. And one of the ways we do that is through help desk time. So that's communities who have questions or want to look at moving projects forward can get in contact with us via our info email address, which will hopefully be on the slides. And if not, happy to provide that at a later date about any questions they have about moving energy efficiency projects forward. And Sustainable Cullington was exactly that. So they wanted to see, what avenues they could look at to making their community hall more sustainable and getting solar PV on the roof. And so we directed them to a number of our preferred suppliers. We had a chat to them about potentially, feasibility studies and looking at planning and so on and so forth. And what we then provided is a low carbon hub small grant that allowed a installer to do a full feasibility study of the site to give them as good an example at no cost and risk of exactly what the process would require and subsequently what finance would be needed in order to be able to get the project moving. On the back of having this, it was then given a low carbon hub land grant. And as the village hall is and the Sustainable Kirtlington is a member of the low carbon hub kick, and I'll come on to that hopefully in a little bit as well, and we'll mention it with Alison's slides as well. But that large grant helped to de-risk the project, so it allowed for those those kind of key pre-development hurdles, so structural survey, potential I think maybe need additional asbestos work, all of those elements that could potentially derail a project in technical feasibility to be overcome at no cost and minimal risk. And subsequently allowed them to also leverage finance to get more money into the project and to then install. And it's a fantastic system. I think it's an in-roof system as well. So it's replacing the tiles with a grid of attachment points for the panels, with the panels then being connected together, the flashing replaced, tiles around them being replaced, and actually creating the in-roof system and creating the roofing system from the panels, which is fantastic. So there's other examples. I think Kirtlington's one of the best one, but if you could move on to the next slide, please. Oh, and there's Celia again in front of the inline panels. It's a fantastic photo that we must show off at every opportunity because she's fantastic, as is the community. So we do as much as we can. But next slide, please. So yeah, other examples that we and organisations we work with, namely Watchfield Village Hall. So Watchfield is very close to Westmill solar and wind farms. For those of you who are familiar with them. And so they've worked very closely with the community in Watchfield to get panels on the roof there. So initially, it again received a low carbon hub small grant to provide that kind of I believe de-risking capacity to kind of have a look what would be available. And then on the back of that, received additional grant funding from WeSet, so the Sustainable Trust, but also from the solar farm directly. That allowed the project to leverage enough finance along with local donations and crowdfunding to be able to get the panels on the roof and operating, which is fantastic. So a similar line, but slightly different in the funding options available. And the next one, if that's all right. So this is Ensham Village Hall, and then along with this and the St. Peter's Church just down the road in Ensham, we work with Green Tea extensively. Ensham Green Tea, a fantastic community group that we work with as any opportunity we can to be able to proliferate community energy in their local community. And this is the first primary example of that. So this is actually our first community project, as it were, by the Ensham Green Tea helped us to install the panels on the community buildings. And this was conducted through the low carbon hub ownership model again. So by which I've presented and glossed over previously, but happy to provide a bit more detail if that would be of interest. But essentially, yeah, the low carbon hub provided the initial investment from our community benefit fund. Our community our rolling community investment fund, and got the PV on the roof. So we engage in a roof lease, install the PV at no cost to the organisation or owner of the building, and then they are able to acquire slightly cheaper electricity, and then also in this instance they were during the feed-in tariff as well, so the project benefited from the feed-in tariff quite greatly, which was great in terms of getting the project off the ground and moving forward. Sadly, I'm sure as many of you know, investigating this, the feed-in tariff is no longer available, and it's certainly not at the rates that made projects like this of this size viable for that community investment model. But more than happy to look at any community halls or buildings that potentially could be viable for this model, to see how best we can help facilitate installations such as this. Yeah, next slide, please. And lastly, a kind of a little bit from blast from the past, but Wolverton Village Hall. So yeah, this was one of the first community buildings to be powered by solar electricity in the country, we believe, and potentially one of the first earliest kind of community-owned building installations that we're aware of. The primary funding for this, again, potentially looking back a little bit there, was through the low carbon buildings program, which is no longer moving forward, and was also received additional grant funding from the county council, city council, and I think the Waste and Recycling Environment Network as well as a couple of local donations and engagement from the community. So another example there of utilising those multiple grant pots as and where they're available, to be able to move the project forward, and then being able to provide that kind of match funding or leverage funding from local community interest or donation. So yeah, kind of a great example of early engagement, which is fantastic. But certainly some of those grant programs fortunately not available currently. So yeah, that's a kind of a whistle stop tour, a little bit of how we've been engaged previously, and how we can hopefully help in those initial instances. What I think Alison's going to run through now is potentially going forward how we could help move forward with community energy projects at the halls and community buildings you have, and how the hub can help further. So if I pass over to Alison, she'll be able to run you through those.
Next slide, please.
So I can just see James now. Is that oh, there you are.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I think when I start talking, you'll be able to see me. So my name's Alison Grunewald. I work with James at the Low Carbon Hub, and I'm my job title is the Business Relationships Manager, but actually that encompasses not just businesses. I also work with organisations, charities, and community groups on some of the energy efficiency projects. And I'm also the CEO of Energy Solutions Oxfordshire, which we'll come to at the end. But in terms of the hub has 3 strands of help that it can help you if you want to implement PV, or you want to look at what the opportunity is in terms of where you could be saving energy in your building. And the first one is a free energy audit for any community. This is eligible, any community hall is eligible for this. And it's funded through Westmill Solar, but we manage that programme essentially on their behalf. The only, and these audits are carried out by an extremely experienced team at Oxford Brookes, the Environmental Information Exchange, Moira and Michael, who have 15 years of experience auditing all sorts of buildings, including community halls. So they really are an extremely experienced energy assessment team. So the only thing with this is essentially it gives you a kind of what's possible, a to-do list of things that you could be doing to make your building more efficient. And they can give you some early indication of whether solar PV might be something you should be considering. So next slide, please. So we also have a programme that I administer called OxFutures, which is funded, it's funded through the European Regional Development Fund. And despite the fact that we've left Europe, luckily that money is still available till March 2023. We've got an extension on this. And we, through the same team at Brooks, we can offer a free audit, but with this route, you can also get funding, implementation funding. So essentially 25% of the capital and installation cost, up to a maximum of £10,000. So for that, it would need to be a £40,000 project or above. And the eligibility here, OxFutures and the ERDF money can only support small and medium enterprises. So if your community hall is owned or tenanted by an SME, such as charitable trust, then you would want to go down this route because you then have that funding opportunity after you've had the assessment. And I'm the person to contact there. So all of these, hopefully, Tessa will share these slides afterwards. So you've got the contact details for these three different funds. So next slide, please. So the final option is Energy Solutions Oxfordshire that James and I have both referred to, which is an ESCO. It's an energy services company, and essentially what we're offering is a wraparound service. So we assess what needs doing, both energy efficiency and PV, and then we will provide an implementation service. So we can contract manage that work, and we've got a list of 23 approved contractors, most of whom are local companies who we're working with. And this is a good solution if you don't have the time or the expertise or potentially the money to implement a project, because we've got links to loan finance providers, so we can help sort out loan finance if that's the route you want to go. This service really works best for larger scale projects that are slightly more complex. So essentially projects of £30,000 and above. And the person to contact here is Richard Dorey, who's our business development manager. So Tessa, if you can we've got a little animation which we hope will work with the sound, which just says a bit more about that ESOX, Energy Solutions Oxfordshire service.
Okay.
Energy efficiency is good business. Reducing running costs makes sense, and reductions in carbon emissions shows environmental awareness. It's a no-brainer, right? Smart ways to implement energy efficiency are out there, but lots of organisations aren't making the most of it, because getting started isn't always easy. From insulation and draft proofing to installing renewable energy systems, how does a business know what will work for them? And then there's the other stuff. Who will do the work? Will it disrupt the business? How much will it cost? And what can we save? Lots of businesses are asking these questions, so we decided to find the answers. Energy Solutions Oxfordshire is a complete energy efficiency service that works with any organisation, and we handle everything for you. It all starts with a free online assessment to establish your energy footprint. If you choose to go further, we'll visit you on site to assess your energy consumption and report back with bespoke recommendations. We'll also find suitable expert contractors to deliver the highest quality service and installations. And once we've approved the work, we'll continue to check in for 12 months. If upfront costs are a problem, we can offer financing opportunities. All this means that you can get on with running your business, while we take care of lowering carbon emissions, saving you time and money. See? It's a no-brainer. Get the best of both worlds with Energy Solutions Oxfordshire.
Well,
Thanks.
so I'm sure there are quite a lot of questions, mainly to do with, well, not mainly, but all sorts of questions I know we've had about the whether roofs are strong enough and what to use the energy for. You know, is it cost effective, that sort of thing. So is there anybody here that wants to kick off with a question? Chris?
Yeah, I was hoping Ken would be here tonight, but I know he had problems with his access on the computer, so we're left with me. I should just explain for James and Alison that I'm a treasurer of Piddington Village Hall near Bicester, and we're looking at having solar panels to obviously help us financially and also to help the community and with the carbon footprint, etc. We did actually have an Oxford Brooks survey about eight years ago, probably might be 9 years ago, 2013, something like that. I'm just wondering, there's obviously a lot of information that we can't really talk about tonight in detail. So I'm going to report back to Ken and also one of my other colleagues who can't be here tonight. He's a bit more electronically savvy than I am, so he'll know a lot more about the electrics. But our objective is to have solar panels, and we've achieved some of our aims from the Oxford Brooks survey. I'm just wondering whether maybe a fresh survey might be useful, seeing as technology's changed a lot in the years, and what we've done in the intervening 8 or so years might affect the viability of what we're thinking of doing. But as I say, I've jotted down all the main points from James's and Alison's really good talk, and which we'll look at. But that's my first question really. Is it worth us having another survey?
So my understanding is that, well, for OxFutures, if you each business or group or organisation can only apply once through that programme, but you haven't ever applied through OxFutures. So if you're a charitable trust, you would be able to come and get a new free to you audit. I don't, it would be interesting to know whether you got that through the community buildings audit route. I would imagine that Saskia might, who's the person who administers that, might say if you've already had one of those, in order to kind of spread the benefit, she might say that, you know, she'd like to help fund people who haven't had one of those before.
Yeah.
So I think that's my answer, and it would be, you know, the Brooks team would have to maybe take a view on the extent to which they'd need to sort of come out and see the site again, depending on how much you've changed, and how much they can do a sort of desktop update for you.
Right. Okay, thanks. That's useful. As I say, I won't go on anymore because there's lots of questions and technicalities that I'm not that good with. But the main point I think is that if I report back to my colleagues, they will be able to contact your office and perhaps get a bit more clarity about all the points that the two of you have made. Yeah, that's my objective, really.
You have actually carried out quite a lot of the recommendations, haven't you, from the
Yes.
EIE?
Yeah, got
Energy.
ground source heating, installation, interior door. A lot of the recommendations have been carried out because we had really terrible heating. It was like roof mounted sort of electric fires, basically. So we have done a lot of work, but same, my colleagues' next objective is to get solar panels and improve the hall that way. As I say, I'm not too well up on those things, but I'm sort of really taking notes, and hopefully we'll get back to the low carbon hub organisation and perhaps just talk through in a bit more detail, not tonight, about what we might need to do. What our size of our hall and the energy opportunities, etc., etc. I mean, one of the points I did make to my colleagues is you'd have to sort of decide if the roof was strong enough to have panels. But again, that's just one of the questions.
If that wasn't included before, could that be something that Piddington could have?
So the EIE can at least say something about the kind of orientation of the building. They may want to know the extent to which the building's being used in the day, because clearly a building that is being used a lot more when the sun is shining makes a lot more sense to have solar panels. So if almost all your energy use is in the evening, the match between when the solar is producing energy and when you need it is mismatched. And I mean, there are people like Dean Court Community Association who have just applied to us for an OxFutures grant for solar panels and a battery. But those batteries, I mean, they've gone for a Tesla Powerwall. It's kind of really marginal about whether that is a good kind of use of money. I mean, they've decided that they've done a massive kind of fundraise and they've raised money from about 6 different sources to enable them to do the work. But yes, it only just made it through our board because they did have a question mark about that battery.
Right, I understand, because my colleagues, I mean, again, I don't want to hog the evening, but my colleagues did get an estimate from a company called Next Generation at Osney Mead. Again, that was talking about a battery, which again, just take it that I know nothing about all the technicalities, but I'm assuming the battery stores the energy during the day and can be used in the evening. But again, that's perhaps a finer point of detail. But one of the points that to make is, which was interesting to me, was the fact you had companies that you could recommend. I mean, I also read online there's a lot of cowboys around, and you've got to be very careful who you engage in doing things unless you're very careful. So that's what our aim is. But is it rather than me carrying on now, is it a good idea to report back to my colleagues and then perhaps they come back to you and just we can talk out if this is a practical exercise for our village hall? So we're very small, we're quite a small village hall. We're not large like Ensham. We do have quite a lot of use during the day. At the moment with COVID, it's dropped away drastically, but we would hope that we do get people back at some point. But again, that would be a matter of perhaps of discussion to see what our use is during the day and how that would evaluate against the practicalities of having solar panels.
So we're happy to talk to you. James, did you want to say anything about installers?
Yes, I think I could just maybe just touch on 2 points there that might help others just quickly. So in terms of structurals, in terms of, will the roof hold the panels? A structural survey will be a must-have for any installation for solar PV. It doesn't matter if it's a house, a barn, a shed, or a giant factory. The installer will have to do some structural calculations to ensure that the roof support can hold the additional weight, minor additional weight, but still additional weight of the panels, but also a windage survey to ensure that the panels will not then damage the roof. So i.e. panels can act as a large sail, for example, in the event of high winds, but as of yet, no concerns there. But those surveys will have to be conducted and do have additional costs on top of the additional installation fees. So that is something to take into account when procuring or finalizing the install. Secondly, absolutely preferred suppliers. So the Low Carbon Hub has 6 now preferred suppliers that we work with. And we don't directly recommend anyone, but we're happy to share that preferred supplier list with you. So again, I'm happy to pass that on to Tessa if that'd be helpful. She can disseminate that, or indeed if you just fire over a question to info@lowcarbonhub.org and just make it for the attention of James. Either Kat or Zoe will make sure I reply to you. But yeah, because they're fantastic at hounding me for those things. They can get lost down the email chain.
Thanks very much.
Be very helpful.
Yeah, that's been very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian, I've got your question here. I don't know if you wanted to. Where are you? Okay, somebody had their. Oh, there you are.
Yeah. Well, a couple of questions. I mean, obviously, I think we'd be very interested to have a survey done. But I was just wondering, more on the innovation front of anything, as you, there's been any experience with using the energy produced from solar panels to provide a charging point for electric cars, the second issue was whether there's been any experience with the use of vertical turbines on village halls, because I understand that these are, well, they are very compact, and that quite a lot of houses in California are able to use them, obviously pitched on the top of the roof. And, on the grounds that if there wasn't sunshine, there might be wind, it could be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking to your first point, EV integration with PV is absolutely something. So the way the PV will naturally work is it connects in behind your distribution board. So it's connected directly into your distribution board, fed throughout the property or the site, and then anything that isn't used then gets exported. If an EV charge point is on that breaker board, it will be fed by the PV as and where it's generating. So I think one of the main points that Alison's alluded to there is, if you know you're going to have community members with EVs or want to have an EV car club, potentially as part of the village hall, ensuring it is plugged in and charged during the day when the sun is shining is a great way potentially continue to offset the fuel costs that EV would have, or indeed a traditional fleet vehicle would have. In terms of vertical turbines, not something I've worked with directly. I've helped a number of schools that had them installed just do some calculations regarding potential output. Again, my understanding is limited. I think there's certainly a greater amount of planning constraint on them. I know, for example, they can, so it's fully detached properties. Must be, I think, a certain distance from perimeter fences and properties, or when attached properties, a certain distance from other additional fences and properties. And then height is also an issue as well. You want it to be higher, but there is, I think, a 1.5 meter restriction for permitted development rules. Beyond permitted development, I think you can probably start to look at, planning applications for them. But as with the PV, which may be a question that comes up regarding planning in a minute, if you can get something within the permitted development, that's fine. But beyond that, that's my very limited understanding, Adrian. I'm sorry. But beyond seeing them at schools and on houseboats in the city, I haven't worked with them directly.
Because I know that on horizontal turbines, there's a great issue about turbulent and laminar airflows, and that you can only put them where the airflows are laminar rather than turbulent. And I wasn't quite sure whether with vertical turbines the same sort of thing would apply, albeit on a much more reduced scale.
Absolutely, and I would have absolutely no idea either. And unfortunately, my expertise, what little of it there is, mostly stems from solar PV. But if you potentially fire over a question to info at, there may be someone in the organisation that we know who might be able to help you. But again, as an organisation, it's wind is something we haven't engaged with to any large degree. Namely, Oxfordshire, for example, has the lowest wind energy resource of any county in the country. So it's solar PV, hydro or bust at the moment.
And Westmill is one of the few places in the county that was, feasible. So, in terms of our wind capabilities, we have kind of ticked the main site to install it.
Well, I'll see what I can find out about vertical turbines anyway. Yeah, I might be able to dig something up.
That sounds great. If you anything interesting, please let us know. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Alan, you sent me a question late today. Have you? Oh, you're still on mute. Bottom left.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Good. Yeah, my question is really in our hall we use stage lighting, which is I think fed off a 100 amp switch, and we run 4 dimmer packs off that as well, which is totally different. It's all part and parcel of the hall's electricity, but it's independent of the lights basically in the hall. If we went solar, bearing in mind most of our shows are around Christmas time, there wouldn't be much sun about really, so would we need battery storage in order to function with cheap electricity?
So I think, as Alison's alluded to, battery storage can provide a way to utilize the power, but it is a marginal, if non-existent, potential additional revenue benefit or cost-saving benefit.
Right.
In this instance, it is getting better, which is fantastic. But certainly
Sure.
at this stage, it's minor, and then that may be compounded by the fact that, as you say, although you may be able to shift the PV through time and instance from the daytime production to when you are, providing the shows in the evening, solar PV, the majority of it is going to be produced during the summer months. So of that, say, 10 kilowatt units, 9,000 units a year, a very small proportion of it potentially would be offsetting those productions during that Christmas period. So again, that may make that battery even more marginal, if potentially a loss leader in adding to the cost of the installing the array in the first place. Potentially one of the ways to not necessarily get round, but to ensure as greater utilization of the PV is to match the PV size to kind of meet, not minimum, but kind of an average demand throughout the year. So instead of maybe going for a 10, 15 kilowatt array, dropping down to 7, 8, 6 kilowatt peak matched to your demand profile, could be one effective way of limiting the impact of the initial cost outlay, while also getting the benefit. So again, this is something EIE would be able to help with if you got an energy audit, and vice versa. If you're able to provide myself at the Low Carbon Hub with as much electricity data as you have, stacks of energy bills are oddly one of my favorite things to see, because then we can start to understand your electricity usage and your patterns, and be able to hopefully get a rough understanding of what that size could be, to best help.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
That's all right.
Are we able to go to a question that's not that's on a general energy use? Oh, Philip. Oh, you're still on mute.
Yeah, our hall runs basically north-south, so our roofs are east-west. So how crucial is it to have a good south-facing roof on your hall?
Crucial is not potentially the word I'd use. Ideal is good. So I think having that kind of 20 degree, 25 degree pitch south facing is fantastic. We have installed east-west arrays previously, so splitting the array in half and then shaping it along the primary ridge line of the hall, with then the sun naturally rising, catching half the array and then catching the other half. There is an implication there for the term is yield, so essentially how much power each panel is going to produce. But there have absolutely the yield impact in general is not overly catastrophic in preventing the array to be financially viable or indeed useful in reducing carbon emissions. So so the installers will be able to provide you with, if you just go out for some rough quotes, and provide you with standard industry practice or SAP figures then they'll give you an idea of what that yield might be, and you could potentially within that compare to what a south-facing array might be, and get an idea of what the impact would be. And again, happy to do that. Again, if you send images or locations to Low Carbon Hub, we can give you a similar idea to the info at email. And as we already mentioned, EIE fantastic at that as well if you want to move forward with a community audit.
Those 3 case studies you showed us earlier, did they all have big south-facing roofs?
I believe the majority did. The only one that might not have is Watchfield. So Watchfield has is kind of a southeast-southwest facing. But yeah, in the majority of instances, as mentioned, ideally a south-facing, fairly good sloped roof is ideal. But I think, yeah, absolutely happy to help understand what the impact would be for an east-west array and what reduction in yield that would create, and subsequently what impact that would be for generation, and to kind of factor into your cost savings, carbon savings, whatever your objectives might be.
Okay, thank you.
I think it is worth saying that the efficiency of solar panels has improved markedly, in the last few years. It's an industry that is constantly improving, bringing both the price down and the generation up. So in terms of, pounds spent for generation, it's that is more and more positive all the time, which is why so many more of these panels can now be installed, despite the fact we haven't got the feed-in tariff.
Is it Maya? Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for that gallop through the options, and forgive me if I missed something. I have a number of questions. Hopefully they're very brief. Did I understand correctly that one can no longer plug into the grid, so you can't earn revenue for creating surplus energy? You can't plug back into the national grid?
No, you absolutely can. So with the solar PV, you're not directly plugging into the grid. Most PV arrays under a certain size, so 10 kilowatt peak, 10.4, I believe, on a 3-phase, don't require notification to DNO. Anything above that will require notification to DNO to say we're plugging a power station into your grid, and that comes with a charge and a lead-in time. But no, we will you install into a distribution board, and then essentially anything that the site doesn't use will then get exported to the national grid. You can then set up a PPA with a supplier, or more recently use one of the registered suppliers who provide the smart energy guarantee or sustainable energy guarantee, I can never remember which one it is, to provide you with a modest income for that metered electricity that you export.
Okay, thank you. That clarified a misunderstanding on my part. So more sort of specific questions. One is, what is the lifetime of solar panels? I understand that they're improving, but what is the lifetime of a solar panel? Two, that there was about 25% of capital investment available from government, albeit the European Union. Is there any other government funding, particularly UK government funding, available, given that the targets, the carbon offset targets that the governments have, quite challenging ones? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, to your first question, which was, I'm sorry, no, the government funding was a separate question, wasn't it?
What was the lifetime of a solar panel?
Yes,
please?
Apologies, I got this up there. So the honest answer is effective lifetime, no one knows. Other than the International Space Station, we have, I think the most earliest recorded one is coming in from the 1990s that we have consistent data for. What we use 20 to 25 years for effective investment lifetime. We would believe that we model degradation in, and within 20 years, we expect the panels to be producing 1.9% to 10, 15, potentially 15% in the worst case scenario less. The thing that's going to go pop first is the inverters. So the inverter will, so the panels will be generating electricity in direct current, which naturally we can't be utilized within the property or the site. So the inverters will change that over to AC. And those potentially, they have a 5-year warranty and as a capacity that you can acquire and greater. but they might go pop at 10, 11 years. So building in some kind of contingency there, but you could keep replacing inverters for those level of panels. You know, there are some panels that, you know, that might do better, that might have more longevity, others that might not. But certainly, you know, 25, 30, 40 years is potentially not unfeasible for those panels to keep generating at a steady degradation if maintained and cleaned.
That's useful. No. The third bit was about whether there's funding available other than the EU, 25% mention of the EU.
Yeah, absolutely. So other than the SEG, direct government funding in terms of, you know, kind of grant, loan or subsidy, to my limited understanding, isn't available for kind of, you know, small, lower commercial, larger domestic, which is potentially where community halls would fit in. There are potential SALIX funding options that have been taken off the board but could return for public sector buildings. Whether that bill extended to community buildings, I don't know. That's all very much up in the air at the moment as to what will happen with that. But no, I think sit back, fingers crossed, and if anyone hears anything, please let me know.
One simple final question: have you ever come across any planning issues with?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I kind of alluded to earlier, we aim to for all the PV we install, and certainly for, you know, operations and organizations that potentially don't have the time, you know, have that lead in time or the funding available to engage in more protracted planning issues, we try to aim to install permitted development. So permitted development for PV is a meter from the edge, less than 500 mil proud of the roof or of the apex of the roof. Again, the exact details preclude me because it's been quite a long time since I applied for planning. Hence, we are in permitted development the majority of the time through our installers. But there have been times when we've had planning issues and we've subsequently had to reduce the size of the array or in order to fit within those guidelines, or not utilize certain roofs previously, but nothing that has, you know, majorly derailed the project.
And I know there was a question that came through ahead of this session about PV on listed buildings. So I used to work for the National Trust, and the National Trust have installed PV on both grade 1 and grade 2 listed buildings, but they are in situations where, you know, there's some sort of mansard and you can't from the ground see the panels, you know, so each site is assessed on its on the project that's being implemented, but the fact that you've got a listed building doesn't preclude you from installing PV necessarily.
We're not a listed building. We wouldn't be nowhere near a listed building, but the only issues I thought might be whether there were lots of local objections purely because people don't like it's unsightly, and that's the only issue. And whether the planning officers were sort of where they're sort of whether they acceded to those sort of complaints, or whether they are more in favour of having solar panels. And I think it's a community issue whether people like to see their village hall with solar panels or not. And particularly the people whose houses look onto the village hall, they might have some issues whether it looks ugly or not. So.
It was me that asked that question, actually. And what I was wondering was, given that all of our local authorities have got climate emergency strategies, whether you'd got any experience of putting pressure, if you like, on the conservation officers by, you know, drawing out the dichotomy between the strategy and not being allowed to make these kind of improvements. Ours hall is a grade 2 listed building.
Our hall is not listed, but it's in the conservation area. How would that apply?
Try it out, I guess, is probably the answer, is it?
I think I'm part of a group that a peer-to-peer group that we're having members of the various district and county councils come and talk to us about their plans. And in fact, Kay, who's on this call, is also part of that same group. And one of the things they said to us is there has always been small groups within these various councils, that, you know, like their energy teams, who are committed to this sort of climate change agenda. But now there's these wider strategic goals. Essentially, all the departments within the districts and the county are being sort of tasked with trying to ensure that their own operations are working towards these zero carbon targets that they've all got. So I think there is a sense in which there are the winds of change in not just the departments that this was their specialism, but in departments like the planning departments. But we haven't got any evidence of that yet but we're being told it's happening.
Thanks.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Have we got time for a question that's not, oh, Teresa.
I was what now? Shut myself off. Never mind.
I can hear you.
Yes, that's fine. We're in a conservation any and we have a Victorian hall, and with an amazing south-facing roof. Would any of the grants allow for, rather than the solar panels, the PV tiles to be used? Have you heard of any of that? Have you heard of anybody asking for those? Because they look better. You can't see them so much. Either of you?
I don't think I've seen an application within our grant scheme yet that's been utilising solar tile. My limited understanding of that is currently that it is at a cost premium for that measure, but that doesn't necessarily preclude their use. And again limited understanding on their additional on their output and what potential impacts that might have. I would recommend potentially looking at those images of Kirtlington, that if you were concerned about bright blue solar panels sitting proud of the roof, an in-roof system might be something that could be utilised as well. So utilising those kind of black panels and tile that sit in the line of the roof could be another option as well.
Well,
personally, I have experience with those tiles.
I wasn't thinking of black ones. I was thinking of something that looked better on a Victorian tile. I think they do them, yeah, manufacture them. Okay, thank you.
Are we able to talk about air source heating? Or are we going off? Charles, you had some questions, didn't you?
Yes, I'm at Snell's Hall in East Hendred, electrically heated. There's no gas locally, and the roof, we've looked into this, and the roof is broken up into many small areas such that you can't put a good solar panel array on top. It's a nice big roof. So what I've understood about air source heating is that because the temperature is lower than one is used to running central heating systems, if you have a badly insulated building, and whatever you do, a big old Victorian hall is always going to be badly insulated, you get this disappointing situation where if you install air source, you have inadequate heat. And of course, nothing more maddening than to pay a lot of money for a heating system, and then it's not warm enough. My question was, has anybody got any experience of a situation in which you said, right, air source isn't going to solve the whole problem, but it's going to contribute towards the heat in a building efficiently, and you may just have to top it up with radiant heaters or whatever. Does anybody have any ideas on that?
We at Bloxham have air source heat pumps on our village hall to use in the main hall, and they're very efficient. It's like an air conditioning system basically, and you can either have it hot or cold. We only use it for heating, of course, but it's very efficient and very quiet.
That's very interesting. You find that it's able to heat your hall on its own?
Yes, I would say it's a sports hall, and so people don't often need much heat, but we also have dance classes and they enjoy it. But it wouldn't do if you had a lot of people doing yoga or things on the floor, because the floor isn't warm. The whole air becomes warm, but it's a bit cold on the floor. So if you're thinking of that, it wouldn't work.
Right.
But for us, as a sports hall and a dance area, it's very good.
That's very interesting, Colin. Thank you.
So, yes, James, were you going to?
I was just going to say we do. So me and Alison have some experience together in this, but what we have done in understanding that limited experience, and we've passed it on to a colleague who's written up quite an extensive answer to some of the questions you passed on, Charles. So we'll get that over to Tessa and over to you with a bit more information moving on from there. But certainly, if you're interested in looking at air source, insulation, all those elements, a community audit, any SOX feasibility report. Any of those measures would be ideal in understanding what insulation would be available to you, and also what the best heating options would be to get that heating system renewable and moving forward.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Well, are there any more?
Because I think as a principle, you do want to reduce the number of air changes in your building, and quite often, reducing the air changes is some fairly straightforward, low-cost measures. So it's a really good starting point to do that first before you think about installing, large bits of expensive kit.
What do you mean by air exchange? What do you mean by that?
By air changes, do you mean just stop air leaking in, blowing in through gaps?
Yes, essentially it means how many times an hour the air in a building is replaced. So a well-insulated building will only have about 4 air changes an hour, whereas a poor building might have 20. So you can just imagine the amount of heat that's needed if your air is changing 20 times an hour. That's a lot of heat that you need to actually produce anything that feels like comfort. Whereas if you've only got 4 or 5, you need a whole lot less heat.
So we're really talking about insulation.
Proofing.
Can I just speak?
Yes?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I would imagine the gentleman earlier, I'm not sure which hall it was now, but it'd be best to sort of get the hall fully insulated as possible, with double glazing, ensuring that the ceiling's got adequate insulation, doors are sealed, all that sort of thing. So we had our ground heat? I'm never quite sure.
Ground source
heating put in, and we used to have radiant heaters on the ceiling, and the difference was absolutely phenomenal. The heating, it sort of distributes the air around. It's got fans that move around inside the unit. But I think our prime objective was to make sure the hall was as insulated as best as it could be. It was never going to be as good as a house because obviously it's a hall, but I think that seems to be an important point.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. We do have some of these measures, but when he's looking at large expanses of just solid wall with no cavity or whatever, and just inherently quite a heavy heating load.
I mean, maybe if you get the Oxford Brook inspection might be handy if you haven't had one already, because the one that they did for us was very, very useful. We implemented, as I said earlier, several parts of that. Yeah.
Very good.
And those reports do give you an indication of a sort of estimated cost and how quickly that's likely to pay back. So what the cost is compared to the likely annual savings.
Right.
Yeah.
So can I?
I was just going to say, with our radiant heaters on the ceiling, the hall was so cold that in the winter, some people just wouldn't even use it. So the difference is phenomenal. Bigger.
Yes, Derek.
Thank you. I'm Derek from Dean Court, and it's really nice to see Alison. We've had an exchange of emails, and I really just wanted to say how helpful Low Carbon Hub had been actually in getting Dean Court to where we are now. Two things: the energy audit we had done first of all, and that was really good. And what no one has said, but actually, not only is it helpful in telling you what you might do and how much you might save, etc., but also we chose to go down our own funding route rather than other alternatives. And what we have found is that the energy audit is a really good status symbol in a funding application, because it does imply that you know independently what you're planning to do, and that scores a lot of brownie points, I think, with funders. One thing I would say, though, is that I hadn't appreciated totally when we embarked on our project, which actually started this week, so we're quite excited about this going on, and that is that we've been renewing our roof at the same time because that was leaking. So I was interested to see Kirkmington went for the in-roof system, which is what we're planning to do. And then we're having the solar panels put in there because we wanted it all done under one contract. We didn't want the roofer blaming the solar panel installer for leaking roofs, nor did we want it the other way around. So that's why we went for a comprehensive package. But the one thing that we probably didn't appreciate fully is that both Low Carbon Hub, or the OxFutures grant, and also the one that we've got for the new roof, while they've been very generous grants, particularly the roofing one is very sizable, we have got to pay the contractor first. And this has been a new sort of experience for us of actually we need to borrow money in order to claim grants. And we have succeeded in getting an overdraft facility with a bank. But what they demanded, which is interesting, I thought, they wanted the whole business. They wanted to see a cash flow forecast for the whole year or more, just to see how your business was and what scope there was for repaying overdrafts, etc. And that again was something that we hadn't fully appreciated at the beginning. But really just to say we are at this exciting stage, and I wanted to just thank Low Carbon Hub for their help, and hopefully we'll be making our grant claims as soon as we've spent the money. So thank you, Alison and James.
Derek, it's lovely to have you on the call. And I think, you know, one of the things that our board was that approved their funding was really impressed by was, you know, the fundraising effort. You know, it's really appreciated that, you know, a lot of these types of community organisations, there's a lot of volunteer time that goes in to, you know, making these things happen. And so, you know, that really helped swing the decision in your favour, because, you know, they were so impressed by that.
That's very reassuring to hear, thank you. But what you may be interested to know, it wasn't actually the solar project in itself, but every Christmas we do a mail shot round our community, about 1,500 homes, and we actually invited them to contribute to an appeal. We wanted to raise 15,000 out of about 90,000 for this project. And would you believe we got just under £15,000 came from a leaflet drop through people's letterboxes, inviting them to come and sing Christmas carols. Unfortunately, we didn't sing the carols in the end because of COVID, but at the same time, we got checks and donations and through all various forms of social media. And it was so gratifying to see it, that people believed in what we were doing. And it was, as Alison was saying, it was community focused, and that was been so good. That was an interesting outcome that we were delighted with, and obviously it helped us get our low carbon hub grant too. Thank you.
Excellent. Alan, you got your...
Yeah, I was just actually part of my question has been answered, but I think one of the things I was going to say was, how easy is it to get a grant? And with grants, sometimes from, say, like councils and that, you have to put up 50% of really what you're asking for. Does that still apply? Or would you be able to, say, completely fund a solar panel roof from a grant?
So you will really struggle to find any grant that will do 100%.
Right.
So what you need to do when you're applying for funding is, if at all possible, speak to the person who administers that. And quite often there's websites, and they will tell you how much grant and how much match. So the match is the bit that you need to find. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the match has to come from your own, resources and savings. It just means that you need to, you may need to either fundraise or find another grant. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of is that sometimes there's exclusions. So our OxFutures money, which is a 25% grant, i.e. you would need to find another 75%. So this is what Derek's managed to do. He's managed to find the 75%.
Right.
That can't come from another European source. So for European grants, you can't find other European match.
Right.
But most of this funding is either at a kind of national or local level. So it shouldn't, in most cases, that shouldn't be an issue. But
could you apply? Could you apply to the national lottery?
Yes, you could. That could be match for what we're doing.
Right.
But I believe, those are quite, from my limited knowledge, I think national lottery applications are require a huge amount of work and input. So actually, one of the good things about the OxFutures application, and maybe Derek can speak to this, is it really is a pretty simple form.
Right.
Yes, the form was relatively straightforward to complete. I think the issue was that we'd already got our quotes for doing the work, and as Alison has already said, our limits will only offer you 25%
right.
of your total cost. So you've got to find out which bits of your project will get to you to that 25%.
Right.
The actual form itself, there's a lot of legalese in it, but at the same time, once you've read it, it's not too difficult. And we managed to do it, so hopefully anybody else can. So
brilliant.
Just need patience.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'll just say, just to Alan, that when we for our heating, we got £10,000 from the National Lottery.
Yeah.
And it was literally just filling a form in online, sending off the evidence of your bank, or the usual sort of criteria, and they just put 10,000 quid in our bank, and that was it. So wow. I wouldn't dismiss it.
No,
but you certainly, as you say, I think earlier somebody said having the Brooks Energy audit was really good in getting several of our different monies that we got for different projects, because it showed that we did a proper energy survey.
Right.
We got our funding from several different sources, put a bit of our own money in just to show willing. So it's like a mix of funding. So maybe that'd be worth considering. And I don't know if you live near a landfill site, do you? Viridor or FCC?
No, we don't. No, we've got a recycling site, but not landfill.
All right. We got substantial monies from the one at Calvert and the one at Ardley near us. But
Oh,
again,
right.
if you're not within 10 miles, it's no
No,
point talking about it.
no. Okay, thank you.
Keep an eye out on the lottery.
Yeah.
I think there's
Will
an
do.
issue with FCC that they don't actually like solar works at the moment, but the people who are funding they'll do the roof, but then they'll do the tray, but they won't do the panels. So they're the people we've got to borrow the money first, and then we
Right.
claim it back. So that's one of the ones I was alluding to.
Right. Thank
So
you.
I think that's an important point that Derek's made, is actually if you find out what, which things people aren't willing to fund, if you've got a sort of project with multiple options, you just match the bit of whatever the project is to the thing that they will fund.
Right.
And a lot of grant funders look very favourably on people who've managed to get grant from someone else. So that sense that money follows money, once you've kind of already secured a pot of funding from one source, you'll then you quite often will find that more money will then follow that money.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, we ought to start wrapping it up soon, I think. I'm just wondering if anybody had an answer to the question that I put, that my colleague wanted to know about, the smart export guarantee. Do you happen to know if that's available for halls?
Yeah, my understanding is there is a commercial and domestic variation between what suppliers can offer, but potentially size and scale could, I'm not too sure exactly where suppliers cut that off. It's something we've been looking at for our own PV arrays that are external to the feed-in tariff that can qualify for that. So yeah, I'm not too sure. Certainly, there's an extensive list. Any supplier over 100,000 customers should have to provide one. So I recommend getting up there and having a chat to as many as possible, and seeing what they offer for the size of array that you have, or for the level of for the size of array you're planning to get.
I think cost effectiveness is a big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which people, I know, I mean, you were saying tonight that panels have really come on in their design, and so more effective. But I know that one hall said that they had panels a while ago, and these were going to be worn out before they'd got their money back, that sort of thing. Have you got any advice on that sort of level?
So I think this maybe links back into the kind of what I was referencing earlier, in terms of that kind of in terms of balancing that kind of size and scale of array versus versus usage. If you have a fair amount of daytime usage throughout the year, working with organizations such as EIE or your providers or installers to try and match the size and output of your array as best as possible to your demand, can mean that ideally you want to be using the electricity you generate on site, because you will be offsetting your 13, 14, 15 pence electricity budget, and so saving money rather than trying to get 4, 5, 6p out of a supplier or a SEG or the SEG. So I think that's certainly one primary element, is ensuring sizing is bang on. As that can, for us especially, we do that a lot for smaller arrays, so those on schools or smaller commercial entities that we work with. We really work hard to size the array to be almost 100% usage on site, or as close as we can get to it, and barring sunny Sunday afternoons in August when no one's using any energy at all. So I think absolutely that's certainly a way that from our business modelling we've really been able to improve our returns moving forward.
You could either have something for just to supply the heating, or something as small.
Precisely, yeah. If you have a kind of an average base load,
go for it and have something like electric car charging.
Yeah, absolutely.
For your extra.
Certainly, there are sites that know that if they're going to expand, so if they are going to move from oil to air source heat pumps, if they're going to provide for a car club, and they know what that power demand could be. You could then expand your array, or build in an expansion of or have your array oversized to be able to meet those potential oncoming demands. The risk is there that those demands don't come, and you're sat exporting to the national grid at 5p instead of saving 15, 16p on your energy bills.
Is there anything else other than electric cars that people have?
In terms of
instead of helping the community in any way?
So I think utilizing the power on site is the best possible way. Expanding your demand, changing your heating capacity, or changing the way in which you utilize energy as a whole within the building away from fossil fuels to be able to be utilizing solar is the best way forward, while also reducing your demand as best as possible. I think it's ideal. There are peer-to-peer schemes that are slowly coming through, and that is a large part of the work we're doing in Project Leo, to be able to potentially sell any excess solar to local members of the community. But that's very much a work in progress, and very much in that kind of sandbox phase, which is coming online, which is fantastic. So organisations like Energy Hall, for example, provide those kind of co-op clubs around an additional array to allow local members to be able to purchase any excess as a co-op from that primary entity. But beyond that, certainly limited in terms of looking at projects right now to maximise cash flow or community benefit.
I know the best thing to do is start with an audit.
Absolutely, I think.
And then you'll
one takeaway.
Then you'll know what scale to go for.
Absolutely, get the experts in and see how best we can help you with your low carbon potential.
Right, thank you very much. Thanks, James. Thanks, Alison. If anybody has any questions that they didn't say, then is it all right if I pass any on, if any more come in?
Yeah, absolutely. So any additional questions, please pass them on to yourself, Tessa, pass them on to me, or info@lowcarbonclub.org for the attention of myself or Alison. And as I said, Zoe and Kat are great at making sure those get picked up. So I'll be happy to help as best we can.
So I think technical questions to James and funding questions to me.
Okay.
And I say all questions to Alison.
Any more? Right. Thank you, everyone, for giving up your evenings, and I hope you found this useful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very useful. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for your input.
The people stage of as we are, I found it extremely helpful and picked up a few very useful tips. So thank you.
No, grand.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a lovely evening, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.